Hello, this is Ben from Web Service Development, and I guess this will be my first kind of maintenance video for Jaxer slash Emerald JS. So, what Jaxer is, it's a pretty convenient. It's the short term for it would basically be it's ASP.NET for Linux, or to be more specific, cross-platform ASP.NET. As originally they had the um, the web server working with Windows, Mac OS, and Linux. And what I'm doing through is I'm going through and scraping down and trying to get to the very bare minimum of what it takes to need to run this, and then get it to run on the Raspberry Pi. And then from there, we might add support back into other systems, but mostly we're going down to Raspberry Pi and building for ARM, and then maybe we might scale up to x86. But in the most part, we're generally building it very geared towards Linux. So there's very little, if not any, chance of really of or very little intent of working towards Windows or Mac OS. But if the source code is portable enough, then maybe it could be possible for someone to go through and build for that in the future. But in terms of support, in terms of priorities, yeah, those are very low, if not almost entirely zero. So this is going to be a quick tour of the original GitHub server. So it was originally made by Aptana. Aptana was later bought out by Appcelerator, which makes Titanium Studio, which is a pretty well-known HTML to Android and iOS IDE. And then later on, they were bought by Axway just recently, last year or so. And so Jaxer was developed about 10 years ago as a built-in server for their Aptana Studio editor. And the Aptana Studio editor, I think, has been sold to someone else, or the rights has been sold to someone else for that. So this is kind of it's kind of a project that was a server-side JavaScript application server that was out before Node.js was even a thing, or maybe in the early development stages. I think around the same time of 2008, 2011, that kind of range. And for some reason, it never got cut off. I think one of the main reasons behind that is because they did build it as a plugin or an add-on to their studio, rather than it being its own individual product. And I think that once Node.js came out and it was an individual product, you could just run that and have it run on the server, or use that to design your own server. That kind of picked up and kind of got popular. But despite not being touched for 10 years old, in terms of the design for Jaxer, it works as an Apache module, and then you have a single Jaxer manager service, which will act to take requests, and then it'll have multiple Jaxer processes which are already set up in advance. So you get a request from the client, the Jaxer manager will automatically allocate it to the Jaxer process, and if that process is busy, then it'll add it to the next process, and it'll add it to the next process, and if all the processes are busy, it'll spawn a new process, depending on how many processes you have set up in the config file. So the original source code is kind of a mess. I think they kind of dumped it once or twice. There shouldn't be I don't think there are that many even commits on this. Let's see, how many commits are this? 39. I don't know if that's numbered. 161. 0 commits. So there's only a couple commits. 16 change files, browse files. I don't think that they used GitHub to build their server actively. I think they dumped it GitHub a couple of times, as there's only 10 years ago. So they kind of built a project and then they kind of deployed it to GitHub at the end of the development cycle, I suppose, which is kind of what it is. But there's a lot of things in here that are just kind of really, because they were trying to build for 3 systems, there's a lot of things going on. Aptana license is the GTK version 3 license, which with a few exceptions and changes. Distribution and damage builder, these seem to be for building like apt or RPM builds, and DMG builder is for building Mac OS DMG files, I guess, for installing that. Doc are documents, which kind of seem there's this one build.python file which runs through and does everything. So the docs and frameworks are kind of like dynamically generated, even though at the end they're only static files. So you can just take the static files and plug them into the end. They don't need to be dynamically generated. Framework tests, they're in there as well, but all three of these are just kind of one thing. Source is the actual source file which builds it. It's kind of like the way they built it is kind of like a hacked Firefox. So since Firefox is able to get, send and receive HTTP requests and write files, it's JavaScript, but it's built on top of a library that will be able to interact with the command line and the system resources. It kind of just seems to be a version of Firefox that they kind of hacked to turn into a server. And so because of that, there's a lot of things. There's like Cairo, there's like PNGs, there's a lot of things in there, or like server-side rendering. There's a lot of visual things that kind of get caught up in the source code that probably don't need to be there. This could, source could be really slimmed down a lot, I think. Tests and tools. And then you've got build PY, global settings, make docs, unit test.py. So even though there should only be one build file here, there's kind of tons of different settings here. And so this is kind of like just huge cluster bleep. Self-censor my sailor mouth here. But this is just kind of like a huge bundle of files that really don't need to be here. So kind of the first thing I've done is, well, one, I've changed it to, I've changed the name to Emerald.js, and Emerald.js just seems to be just a lot cleaner word for it. And where Emerald.js comes from is just kind of, it's a play on Ruby. And then an Emerald, the shape kind of resembles Node.js. And then another kind of funny thing is if you look up Firefox is based on a book, and one of the books that the author wrote started with Emerald something. So there's kind of a connection to Firefox with that in there. And I just kind of think it's a clean name that kind of reflects the project a little easier. And so the first thing I've just kind of done is I've just kind of gone through and just tried to simplify it a lot. So if you take out all the stuff that doesn't need to be there, starting with the unnecessary nested files. You've got the license. Distro and tools are used during the build process. These probably don't need to be here. And if I can open this new build. So the build process is about, I got it down from 500 lines of Python to about 350 lines of Python. And there's honestly not a lot going on here. There's the config files, which these were separate files, and I just decided to include them. So there's probably not a lot that actually needs to be here. These config files, I mean, we don't really need to turn things on and off. We kind of just want to get one thing that works and works well. So a lot of these start servers, stop servers, this can be moved into systemctl eventually, and these probably shouldn't be shell files included. The PID should be included into var log. So a lot of these can be knocked out. GetOS, we just want Linux, so rather than building on different things. And then there's a kind of few remove dir not created today. There's a few files, or there's a few functions in here. And then after that, there's a lot of just build commands. And again, a lot of things don't even need to be in here. So I think we can get this down from 350 lines to probably around 200 lines or something. I just simplified a lot. There's a lot of stuff that doesn't need to be here. So this is the build file. And so inside the build file, I got sidetracked. It references tools and distro in there somewhere, and that's why I'm leaving these in here too. But if we slim down and simplify and clean out the build file more, then these two can probably go away. And then that just means we have our files, which includes the server-side framework and the documentation. The source to actually build it. The license, which includes Aptana's GPL version 3 license with a exception clause in it. And that should be about it. So the more and more stuff you clean out, the simpler it gets, and it gets a lot easier to use. And so we're just kind of picking away and trying to make it cleaner and simpler to use. And so right now for a build destination, we're specifically using the Raspberry Pi, and this is running with the latest Raspbian from the raspberrypi.org. And I think this is, I don't remember the exact date. It's from July 2019. So it's potentially running profile. That's not what I want. I can't think of the command to show the Raspberry Pi version off the top of my head, but this is running. Oh wait, no, this isn't running. We've managed to build it with the July 2019 version, and then this is an older version that I flashed earlier this year, so probably from 2018, and it just ran apt-get update, apt-get upgrade. If I do sources.list, it should be on Buster, so that's I can kind of show that there. Okay, but aside from that, the after Jaxer, and I'll mostly be referring to Jaxer because that's what a lot of the branding and the labels are currently, and the directories are currently named. But once it compiles and installs into opt/aptana Jaxer, and there's a lot of, and here is kind of a similar story to the GitHub documentation, that there's a lot of things that probably don't need to be here. Apache 22, right now it runs as a Apache module, and so it builds Apache with it. Since it's running as Apache module, what it's doing is Apache's getting the requests, handling the HTTP requests, and if it sees an HTML file, then it hands it off to the Jaxer manager. And so because that's just working with TCP sockets, then we could probably use something like Node.js, or maybe even Go, or just some different language that's easy to build a custom HTTP server, is find out if there are any bytes on the front or on the end of each request, and then just build our own HTTP server, hand the request off to Jaxer, let Jaxer do its thing, and then and return it. So if we can do that, either build it with Node.js or Golang, or something like that, then maybe we can remove the condition for Apache to be in here. Data is whenever Jaxer uses an internal MySQLite database to write information for this code that needs to run on the server side. So that goes in data, and that's currently, it automatically makes it a 777. Anyone can read and anyone can write it. So that's, well, one, it's not good practice, and two, the data folder probably doesn't need to be here. But for right now, it's a easy, kind of convenient place to put it. Maybe inside the Jaxer folder, but for right now, I'm not too kind of picky about this. The Jaxer folder actually holds the Jaxer binaries and the modules that needs to run, so that's kind of important. License.txt is, again, the Apache license. Local Jaxer, this is kind of confusing because Jaxer runs with one standard configuration file, but then you can define your own configuration that kind of overrides the standard configuration. And so we don't really want that. We just kind of want one Jaxer with one configuration that runs with normal parameters that kind of anyone can kind of use. So local Jaxer is one thing we want to get rid of. Logs, right now it writes to this logs inside of here. This should go inside of var log and the Jaxer folder. So that's something I need to kind of update post install. Public is the folder which holds all the static HTTP and JS files that it needs to run. README probably could go into the GitHub repository. It might not necessarily need to be inside the install folder. Scripts are for starting and stopping the Apache and Jaxer servers, which probably should be in systemctl or handled with systemd. And then we have temp, which holds like cookies and sessions and quick things that can go away once the server stops or starts. So this probably should be in /temp. I think that's also where PHP stores these kind of temporary files. So the kind of quick two low-hanging fruit here are logs and temp. And I think we can move those in the into the configuration and make directories for them, and I don't think they need to be here. Local Jaxer is a little bit more squirrely. I've attempted to remove the file, and it takes a lot of surgical operations to remove this. And so this will take a lot more testing in order to remove this. And then there's data. So I think what I'll do is I'll jump into the public folder real quick. And I've kind of have a bunch of different things in here, which I'm kind of playing around and testing with. But I'll make a quick hello.html file. And so just the way, if anyone's used, I think this is, I haven't personally used ASP.NET, so I can't really speak to how that works other than the very little that I've used. I'm mostly a PHP, Node.js, Golang, anything that's on Linux. I'm very kind of happy to jump in and use it. Microsoft and the IIS server. I don't even know what IIS server stands for, so that kind of gives you an idea of how familiar I am with Microsoft services and products. But what I've seen from the samples I've seen of ASP.NET, it seems to work in a very similar way. And what that is if you write script run at equals server proxy, and then close the script tag, and then we can write a function in here. Function hello, and then we can say return hello world, and then in the body you can put a button hello button script slash script, and we'll kind of just be ugly and simple and just do say hello and function say let message equals await jaxer.async dot and console.log message. So once we've done that, I have my server running on 1.7, and we can go to tests, and we can go to hello.html, and let's kind of open up the network. We don't have a favicon.ico, that's fine, and then just say hello. Just to make sure that this function is getting called. It's not. So now I don't really write a lot of inline HTML a lot, so click say hello, and then hello world came out. So what's going on is we can take a look at the page source, and what's going on is if we see in our original source code, we have a script that says run at equals server proxy, and then in our actual code we don't have anything that says server proxy at all. We just have something that says Jaxer that creates proxies hello. And so what this is doing, it says, oh, okay, this is supposed to be a callback for the client from the server. It rewrites the header. It automatically says to the client, hey, make a callback for this, make an Ajax callback for this. And then once it does, is it inside Jaxer, that async inside that namespace, it'll add a new function called hello. And if you call hello, it'll automatically call the function that we defined for it. And so there's a lot of cool things that we can do that. Say hello Ben, and put that in here, and say hello name, and then we can come back here and concat this and say plus name plus boom. and then go back here, reload this, click, say hello, hello Ben. So the kind of cool thing about this is that it automatically will take your arguments from your client-side call. It'll parse them, not parse them, it'll create a JSON argument. It'll send that to the server. The server will automatically pass that into the function. The function will execute. It'll take the response from that. It'll serialize it and then return it back to the client. And then the client can just grab that as a variable called message, and then we can say, just use a variable message. So the really nice thing about this is there's very little glue or anything that needs to happen. There's that needs to go on between your client code and your server-side code. You can just define a server-side function. You can call it seamlessly from into your client script, and it reacts to changes very, very quickly. Anytime you change your server code, you can change your client code, and they kind of work together synchronously. And so this is kind of like one of the biggest, advantages to using Jaxer, which is why we've been using it for the last 10 years. And so we're trying to develop it and get it out there and rename it to Emerald.js and just kind of make it easier to use and easier to install. So this is running on the Raspberry Pi, and right now it just works from running these three prepare, build, and install. All you have to do is just run these three Python files, and it'll create a workable environment to your Raspberry Pi, and then from there you can use it. And now that we've got an easier option of making a workable environment. So right now we're trying to narrow down and script down the things of post install, of how can we simplify that, what can we do on the server side to get it simpler, and how can we make it easier to use or more portable and things like that. So that's the current state of our Jaxer maintenance for the time being. So I hope to make another video next month similar to this about progress that we've made or different nuances inside the post install. But for right now, that's it. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.